Hey, it's Rachel with Journey Back Quilts. In this series, we are finishing up our traditional quilt blocks. Today's lesson, we're going to be putting sashing and cornerstones with the 16 blocks that we've made in the previous lessons in the series to start finishing up our quilt top. So the way I like to do this is I'm just going to sew my white strip, which is what I'm going to put in between each of my blocks. It's measuring 2.5 by 12.5 again, on the right side of all of my blocks. I'm just going to do all of them on the right side, and then I can reference back to the picture that I just took to lay them back out once I'm done with that. The other thing, as I'm doing that, I'm also going to be sewing my little cornerstones onto my strips on the right side of my strips, just all on the right side of my strips. And then we'll have just the very left hand side of strips and cornerstones left to put together on the rest of these. So let's go ahead and just go chain piece all of these on the right sides and get those put together, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, now that we have sewn all of the sashing and the cornerstones to the right side of the blocks, I'm going to break thread here, and I'm going to use my handy dandy little cutting gizmo to clip apart the connecting threads. And what I want to do is just pile them back up exactly the way that I had them, because this is my very top left block, and this is the one next to it. And this is the one next to that. And this is the one next to that. And that is row 1. Now row 2, this is the furthest left on the second row. And as I'm clipping them apart in the order that they were and just stacking them back up, I can continue to sit and sew without having to go lay it back out on my design board. As long as you pile them back up exactly the way they were. Okay, so this last block is my bottom right block, the very furthest right on the bottom 4th row. So now they're stacked back up in the order that they should be. And now I have the same thing with my cornerstones. I took them the exact same way I did my blocks. I started from the left and worked to the right, from the top to the bottom. So this is my very top left block. And I'm just going to stack those going in the same direction. And then we can sew them all into pairs. If we do this exact same process, we can sew them into the pairs into 4. And then all we have to do is add that 5th side, or that last cornerstone, or the last sashing, depending on what you're doing, to the left hand side of the row, and everything will be in order. I like to sit and sew as long as I can until I can't anymore, and then I'll go do my ironing, lay things back out if need be, and then continue to sew. But if we can sit and sew as long as possible, listen to your show, your podcast, that's where my joy is. So, okay, so this is my very top left hand sashing with cornerstone. Now there will be another cornerstone on this end. That's my very furthest left block that I left on my wall. So this is going to get connected to this one. So make sure you've got cornerstone to your sashing. You're just going to line those up, right sides together, raw edges together, and then 1/4 inch seam. And we're going to chain piece all of these into pairs. Have fun! Okay, you just saw me put all the sashing and cornerstones together in groups of 2, but now we're going to do the blocks. So this is my furthest right at the bottom row, the 4th row, and this is the one next to it. So I'm going to put this one right sides together, And we're going to just match up those raw edges with the sashing strip and sew them together. You do want to be careful not to cut off your points here, right? So try to keep that 1/4 inch right at that point right there. So all of the points of these blocks, you want to be careful about those. And doing a little at a time is just fine. Let this foot anchor and your needle anchor your block together while you adjust the next little bit of your block, and just keep doing that. Okay, and now this is the second block on the bottom row, and this is the first block on the left, and those are going to go together. So I'm going to put those right sides together, line up this block with the sashing. You can also see that I'm trying to keep my seams folded to the way that they were already ironed, so they don't flop over and create a twisted seam or do something weird like that. When you can help it, that just kind of helps the whole quilt lay nice and flat. I'm also lining up the bottom of the block with the bottom of the sashing. That way, if there's any fullness in here, sometimes you can kind of get away with wiggling it out while you're sewing it, instead of having a huge gap at the bottom or having a wrinkle sewn down in the middle. You can line those up and then soften out all those creases in the middle here. And it just takes some practice. It's kind of hard to explain, but you'll see what I mean as you practice it. All right, now we've sewn them in pairs. So now we're going to take those pairs and sew them into rows of 4. So I'm going to go ahead and break thread, and we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. So this is the one I just finished sewing, obviously. And if you clip it apart, so you can see this is the furthest left on the top, row number 1, and the one next to it. Okay, so that's going to go down here, and I'm just going to keep them folded because it stays nice on my table. And then this is the one next to it. So it is the top row. So this is the furthest right with the center. Okay, and then those are going to get sewn together. But before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and clip apart all the connecting threads and lay them back out in the piles that they go. And that way I can sew them into rows of 4 easily, and they're staying in order as long as I didn't make a mistake. And that's why you took a picture. So refer back to your picture to see your layout, see how you wanted them put together. And with my sashing, if I made a mistake, it's not a big deal. They're scrappy anyway, but I am going to try to lay them out in the right order. Okay. Now that they're all clipped apart and in the right order, I'm going to take this one, and I've got my first cornerstone is going to be here once I'm done making this into a row of 4. And then this is number 2, this is number 3, and then this one is number 4 and number 5. And you can see I did kind of the pink, greenish, teal, blue color, and then pink and blue. So I'll know that this is the one that goes to the teal, because pink is next in line. And then we're just going to sew those down, and that will be our very first sashing row at the very top. Actually, no, that one's the very bottom. I'm working my way backwards. Okay, and then this is number 1, number 2, number 3, and 4. So I'm going to put the white with the pink and continue to sew these in groups of 4. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the blocks as well. Okay, now I'm back at the blocks. So this is my furthest right at the bottom, and this one goes next to it, and then this one was next to that, and this was the furthest left. Okay, so we're going to put these 2 together. So I'm going to put this one right side on top of the sashing, line up those raw edges, and now we have a row of 4. And we're going to have 4 rows of 4. And you can see that I'm not securing these stitches down by back stitching. I am just sewing straight on, and that's totally fine. The only time I will do that is with my very outside borders, because we want that to be nice and secure for when we put it on the long arm. Otherwise, everything, all these seams are going to get sewn right back over with the next piece. Okay, last step, I'm going to go ahead and grab my last 5 cornerstones and my last 5 sashing rows, and we're going to finish off these rows real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and clip apart the connecting thread again and line them back up the way that they were going. Now they're getting a little bit big. Okay, and then our sashing cornerstone rows, try to lay those out in order. I know they're getting a little long. And I'm not like Miss Perfection. I just kind of slap them over here, get them out of my way. Okie dokie. So this is my bottom row. So I want to grab my bottom block. So we've got, this is the furthest right. And then at the very end of the furthest left is where we want to put our other block. Okay, now I'm moving on to the rows of blocks, and I'm just going to flip it over so that we're at the very left end, so we can put that last sashing strip on that end. Go ahead and do that to all 4 of these rows, and then we'll be ready to move to the ironing board. Okay, so now we're going to iron all of our sashing and cornerstones. I'm going to iron the seams going towards the cornerstone. So lifting that cornerstone up, you can just press that seam going over towards that little square, and that way it's resting against that. And with our big blocks, we're going to iron towards the big block, and that way our seams are going to nest right here, and we'll get those perfect points for our cornerstones. So go ahead and iron all of your strips going towards the cornerstone on each side. So this one's going this way, and then you got to lift up and go this way so that they're both coming in to the cornerstone. All right, now with our giant block rows, we're going to iron this sashing towards the blocks so that we can nest them with our cornerstone sashing rows. So we're going to have to lift up this block with the sashing on the ironing board so that that seam will lay flat back here, and then use the iron to push that seam over. You may have to use your finger to help keep that seam tucked under while you iron. And if you need to use your clapper so that everything sits nice, because some of these blocks have a lot of seams going on, that will help absorb all the heat and set that seam so it's nice and flat. Okay, so then we're going to do that to this one as well. So this is a little bit more awkward, but you can do it. So you're going to flip the seam so that it's nice and flat. I like to do it from the top because it's too easy to accidentally fold over and iron a wrinkle into your block instead of having it nice and open all the way. So I'm just going to hit this one first because I have it nice and set. And that will make it easier to hit this one next. So I'm going to flip that over. I may just press that back down, and then I can push it over. The nice thing about ironing it away from the sashing is you won't have this stark line that you're going to see like you can on this block. And that's okay. But all of our sashing is going to match. They're not going to have these seams. Where some of these blocks still have seams, like this one. You can still see some on there. So that's a good way to keep everything very symmetrical. Okay, these center ones are the hardest ones to do. So I'm going to start with one side, get that pressed over. And then fold this back over because my iron hit this seam, and I'm just going to flatten it back out before pressing it over. Now you can press it from the back first and get them going the right direction, and then flip it over to the top and make sure that it ironed completely over instead of folding some of that fabric over. So let's try it with this one. So let's just flip it over, and all of these seams we're wanting to go away from the sashing. So we're just going to press that over. Okay. And now flip it back over and make sure that this ironed all the way over. And this ironed all the way over. So that kind of makes it easier if you need that little bit of help. The points on this card trick block are very bulky, so I'm trying to get them to lay nice and flat again. All right, same thing with this last one. Okay, go ahead and do that to all 4 of these rows, and I'll see you back here in just a second. Now that we have everything all ironed and ready to go, now we can add our sashing to our rows of blocks. So just like I said, we are nesting these seams here, which makes it a lot easier to get those perfect points if our seams are just right. So we're going to find out in just a minute. Now, because this is such a long strip, you can pin it if you want to. You're just going to line up and nest those seams and put a little pin in there. Or you can just work a little chunk at a time, just like we do when we were making the blocks. And that's how I'm going to do mine. So I'm going to start with this end, and we're going to sew down so that my sashing row is on top, so I can keep an eye on it since it's so much smaller. All right, let's go back to the sewing machine. The other awesome thing with this is we can chain piece all of these. So I'm just going to chain piece the bottom sashing to each of the rows and leaving the very top sashing on my design wall until I am done putting these on there. So I'm going to nest these first seams. Match up the raw edges. Just like we do with the blocks, I'm just going to sew past that nested seam and then pause. But because this is the edge of my quilt, I am going to put an outside border on this, and that's going to be next week's lesson. It's going to be our last lesson to this quilt. I am going to go ahead and stabilize these borders, however, the sashing, just so that it makes it easier to put the borders on without little stitches missing. Okay, now I'm past that nested seam. I'm going to pause and adjust my layers. And I am watching out for my points too. There's a point right here underneath this sashing, making sure I just sew right next to it. Try not to chop that point off. And as the next cornerstone gets up on my sewing table here, I'm going to pause and adjust the fabric so that those are nested as well. I'm going to sew just past that and pause, because then we have to adjust this next level right away. And bringing some of the bulk up into your lap or up onto the table will help. And if it's not big enough, which mine looks like it's just a little hair too shy, I might have a wrinkle in it. And if I don't like that, what you can do is go ahead and deepen your 1/4 inch stitch on the side here. So you'll have to rip out a little bit, deepen your stitch here, make sure it is a 1/4 inch, because sometimes it's easy to shorten that when you're putting them on. I'm going to keep going, and then we'll check it in a minute. Making the quilt blocks is definitely more fun than putting the sashing and the cornerstones and everything together. This takes some time, some patience, some practice, it's not as fun. So the good thing though is you are almost finished and it's going to look amazing when you're done. So keep going. Don't lose heart. Keep persevering. You've got this. I am so excited to see it. I can't wait to see what fabrics you chose to make all these and finish it with. Oh, it's going to be amazing. Make sure you share those with me in our Facebook group. And I am going to back stitch here too to secure the end. And then just sew off of it so we can chain piece the next one. So let me grab that. And I will often put the length of everything in my lap so it helps hold the weight of the row. So the machine's not having to try to pull all that weight through while we're trying to keep everything nested and everything just perfect. That's too much to juggle. So just get the weight up either on your table if you're able to or on your lap. So I'm just going to iron all of my sashing towards my blocks just like we did before, just to keep everything similar, and that way we can see our perfect points and check them out. If they're not to your liking, you may need to fix your 1/4 inch seam on the cornerstones. Sometimes that's the culprit. But don't be too perfectionist about this. Enjoy the process. Enjoy this experiment. And you can always perfect your pieces as you go. The next quilt that you make, just tweak something and see if you can get it to work even better. This one doesn't have to be perfect, especially if you used up your scraps. So go ahead and get all of your borders that we just did ironed towards your blocks, and then we can start adding them together to 2x2s and then put them together in their 4. Okay, so go ahead and get those ironed and I'll see you back here in a second. Now that we have those all ironed, now we get to put them into rows of 2 rows together. So same thing. This is row 1, row 2. We're going to nest these seams. If you need to pin them, go for it. Otherwise, we're just going to nest as we go. And I'm going to sew with, you could do it either way. You could have this one on top, or you could flip it around and start on this end. Just make sure that you are sewing the correct side together. You don't want to accidentally sew this end together when it was supposed to be this end. Really probably wouldn't matter with it being so scrappy, but you'd worked so hard to get everything laid out and just perfect, so you want to make sure you put it together right. So I'm going to go sew this down. I do have my sashing on top. That way I can kind of keep an eye on it since it's smaller and easier to make a mistake with. So just get that first seam nested and let's go sew it down. All right, now I have 2 rows sewn together. Now I'm going to iron it towards the big block side away from the sashing. This is a little bit easier now that we have some more rows on there. I can just lift that fabric up and press it over. Oh, that looks so good. Love it when it turns out. And most of my points look good. That one's a little off, but I'm not going to be too perfectionist about it. That one's a little off too, but you know what? It's okay. We had fun making it, and it's super cute. I know as quilters can get kind of hung up on being perfect all the time, and a lot of times that slows us down because we get frustrated and we want it to be just so. but we might be stuck on something, or we might not know how to fix a perfect point or something like that, and it just gets you hung up, right? And then you just stop quilting. Well, I want to encourage you that quilting is not about perfection. There's no quilting police here at Journey Back Quilts. Quilting is about finding your joy and having fun, creating something, keeping in mind the recipient, even if that recipient is yourself. Keep in mind that this is something someone's going to wrap themselves in and remember you and be like, they loved me so much. They took the time to cut out all these little pieces and to sew them back together and make this gorgeous piece of art that I get to sleep with or cuddle with. They're not going to be looking at, oh, there's not a perfect point there. Oh, she's not very good at her quilting. And if they are doing that, then shame on them. That's not nice, because you made this out of the love of your heart. So keep practicing, keep going. Don't stop just because it's not perfect. And you never know, the next quilt might be perfect. It might be just amazing. Take your time, have fun with the process. Don't rush, but don't be perfect either, okay? Because we're human, we're not perfect. It sure is exciting though when we get some perfection in there, right? I like to say that every quilt tells a story. And sometimes our quilts are hurried and they are not perfect because we had to hurry and accomplish them before the baby shower that was right around the corner, because your sister didn't tell you the gender until it was like 4 weeks away from the baby shower. And so the quilt might not be perfect, but it was made with love, and that baby is not going to care, and they're just going to cherish it as they grow. And then some quilts, you can tell that you took your time and you had a lot of fun with it, but you were perfect at it. And those might be quilts that you want to put in a show that you're trying to win an award or a ribbon for. And that's great. But most quilts, you're just going to be doing for the fun of it, for the joy of it, for what it gives you, the relaxation, the skill that you're learning, the fun of it. When we're quilting, we kind of get to be a little bit like kids again, but with power tools, with big irons and big sewing machines and pokey and sharp things, right? So have fun with it. Be a kid and enjoy the process. Okay, that's my little lecture. Now that I have both of these ironed, I get to sew them together, and then I'll just have the very top sashing strip to put at the very top. This is actually my very bottom. So let me put those together and go sew them down. All right, I'm just gonna iron this one real quick and then put the top sashing row on. And our quilt will be done with the sashing and cornerstones. There is one more step to this that we're going to see next week, where we put the outside border on, and I'm going to teach you how to do mitered corners. They're easier than you think. All right, I'm going to add that last row of sashing to my top, and this quilt will be done for today. Woohoo! And there we go. You finished putting your sashing and your cornerstones together with all of your blocks. You should stand back, take a picture of it, admire it, and don't judge yourself too harshly now. Just appreciate the last few weeks that you've been putting this together and enjoy the journey. Great job! Hey, thanks so much for joining me today in making all of our sashing and cornerstones to put our blocks together. I hope that you enjoyed this process and that you are excited for a finished quilt. We would love to see this quilt top as it's getting finished. There is a free Facebook page where you can post pictures of all of these blocks and your finished product in the description box below. If you'd like more help on your quilting journey, I invite you to join our society, a membership where you will get a library full of quilting tutorials to help you on your quilting journey. You'll also get access to me and a community full of quilters just like you from around the world. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next week where we add the outside borders to this quilt top and we will be done with this quilt. I'll see you then.